Good afternoon, everyone. If you don't know me, my name is Denise Keel. I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan Climate Action Network back there. Our whole mission is to amplify, connect, and support all the people, communities, and organizations doing bold and equitable climate action, which is all of you, right? So I get to spend my days with all the people who do care about climate and are concerned, and I'm here today to introduce you to one of those people who does all of those things, individual and community and organizational. Eileen Boekestein is the Environmental Education Manager for the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Eagle, where she is responsible for Michigan's statewide environmental education efforts through the Eagle classroom. And when I say she is responsible, I really mean that. When I first met Eileen about 3.5 years ago now, she was the only one in that office doing this work. She now has 2 more full-time staff and 2 part-time staff. So she has increased her staffing in this department 500% since I have known her, right?
I like that. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Because they're doing so much things. If you don't know what the Eagle Classroom does, you've probably heard of beloved programs like the Michigan Environmental Education Curriculum Support, MEECS, one of the greatest acronyms ever, the Student Sustainability Summit that she spearheaded, the Michigan Green Schools program that hopefully you just learned a whole bunch about from Charlotte and the team that's here today. There, in my role at MyCan, I get to see again how Eileen really works extensively with the schools across Michigan to support both educators and students in the implementation of that place-based stewardship action and projects. Together, we have worked with the Michigan Alliance for Environmental Outdoor Educators. You're going to get to hear from Bridget Booth right after this to talk about a project that the triumvirate of Eagle, MyCan, and Mayo helped put together, the Climate Education Hub. We are also all working on a burgeoning statewide youth network, and so I'm looking at all these fine students out here. Please, please, please come join the movement and this work. You can find Eileen out in the wild leading many, many trainings and programs and workshops. Literally every time I see her, she is out there working this and working the room and doing field trips. I've been on some of the most fun field trips that you have organized, so I appreciate that very much. She's worked in environmental education for nearly 20 years with an overall goal of building environmental literacy for all. And today she's going to bring her expertise from roles from nature centers, higher education, nonprofits, and her current role at the state to you. I promise you her message is one that you all need to hear. And it's my privilege to hand over the mic. Eileen.
I'll do this one. Okay. I don't want to stand too close to that because I don't want to make it scrape at me. But I'm going to bring my notes over here in a second. Hello, where am I going to stand? Okay, I'm going to stand here so that I can see everybody. You can all see me. I am thrilled to talk to you today about this idea of transformative hope. So as Denise mentioned, my name is Eileen Boekestein. I work at Eagle. I have worked in environmental education for a long time in a lot of different roles and spaces. And one of the things that I've found over time is that people tend to think about environmental education as something that only happens with kids. I will admit that I am here today talking about environmental education with young people, specifically in the K-12 space, but that is not the only place where environmental education happens. That is something that happens throughout someone's entire life, this growth of environmental literacy, and I just want to be clear about that you're never too old or too young to be increasing your literacy about the environment. So we're going to be talking today about some specific techniques for teaching about climate change with young people. We're kind of geared towards the K-12 space in terms of like the research that I will talk about, but many of these concepts, again, can certainly spread out into education with other audiences. So just be aware of that. I'm thrilled to be here with you. How many of you, a couple of you were there yesterday when I spoke? Raise your hand if you were there yesterday. Okay, so just a few. Okay, so for those of you who were there yesterday, I spoke for just 20 minutes or so. You all today are going to be getting what I like to call director's cut version of the speech. So there'll be a little bit of review for you all so that everyone can get on the same page, and then we're really going to dive deep into the how to do the things that I talked about yesterday. So I was so thrilled. So before I get into this agenda, I want to say I was so thrilled to listen to Tanya at the beginning because, so this happened yesterday. I spoke at the beginning, and then the keynote speaker, it was like as if we had met and become soulmates and like written our presentations together, even though we hadn't. And I was as you were speaking, I was like, oh my gosh, it happened again. It happened again. So much of what you talked about earlier with White Lake and just the love and the deep care for that community is echoed here in what I'm saying today. So I'm really thrilled that we're kind of bookending our day with those feelings of love and hope and perseverance and resilience. So like Tanya, I kind of organized this in terms of our theme for the event here. So reflect, repair, regenerate. We are talking about K-12 climate education. We're going to begin with reflection on the need for transformation in the way that we specifically teach about climate change. We're going to think about how we can repair our understanding of what good climate change education actually is. What do we need to do? What do we need to do more of? What do we need to do less of? What do we need to shift? And then we are going to really think about how we can use those changes that we've made to regenerate our planet through hope-fueled action. So that's kind of where we're headed. We're gonna jump in. One thing I wanna say is we're talking about climate change. This is a heavy topic. And when we talk about climate change, and when we teach about climate change, and when we learn about it, for most people, regardless of what you feel about it, regardless of where you are on that like Six Americas survey thing back there, you have some reaction. And so we're going to take a moment to kind of reflect on our own feelings, our own emotions, our own understanding of where we're at, and we're going to reflect on what our young people are thinking as well. But I want to start with you thinking about yourself and where you're at. So when you think about climate change, what is I just want to like your gut reaction, your first thing that comes to mind when I say climate change. It could be a word, it could be, I'm kind of like a color thinker person, sometimes a color comes to mind. It could be an image, it could be a phrase. So when I say climate change, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Raise your hand if you want to tell me. This can be a conversation. Yes?
The end.
The end, I heard. Okay. What else? Anybody else?
You gotta do something.
Gotta do something. I heard fear. Bridget? Grief.
Frustration.
Frustration.
I see red, I see fire.
Red. Red is the color that comes to mind for me too. Yeah, so a lot of what we brought up, right? There's a few of us here, good job, those who are already on the path towards hope here. But many of us, that first thing that comes to mind is it's negative. And, people who are older, adults who are, 30s, 40s up, we grew up in a time when we were just starting to learn about climate change in school. It's scary and things are bad, but like that wasn't the narrative of my childhood. And for many young people now, and maybe those of you who are here as students, that might have been something that you were raised with, is this like deep dread and fear about your future. And that can be extremely disempowering. And so I want to kind of explore how we can take that dread, that disempowerment, and shift reframe it, shift the perspective to actually drive us towards action. So climate change, I assume, I'm going to make an assumption that if you're here, you understand that climate change is a really wicked problem. It's complex, it's multifaceted. If that is not something that you understand, that is a different presentation that I'd be happy to give at another time. But we're going to be talking about how to deal with that problem. And one of the areas I want to kind of highlight right now, I'm not going to go super depth in it, but is this impact on health. Because health is one of the things that especially our young people are particularly aware of, both physical and mental health when it comes to climate change. And those health impacts can be both direct and indirect. So direct health impacts might be things like we're seeing in Michigan, it doesn't get as cold in the winter, and so the tick population is not dying off, and so we're seeing the spread of Lyme disease. It could be something direct like that. It could be a little bit less direct. It could be you were in the path of some natural disaster, one of these big storms that Tanya talked about earlier, and that there is some lingering trauma from that. Those are kind of your more direct impacts, but there can also be indirect impacts. So even just overwhelming intake of news about climate change sometimes, the information overload, knowing somebody or thinking about people who've experienced issues can have these indirect mental health impacts as well. And this is something that is hitting our young people, K-12 students, college students, young adults, particularly hard, in part because they have been inundated with this feeling their whole life. Many of our young people are actually feeling these results, not just indirectly, they are actually feeling them directly. So this was a cool resource that I just stumbled across this week, actually. An organization called Undaunted K-12 put out this dashboard that shows the impacts of climate and extreme weather events on schools. So some of these dots, it's kind of hard to read on here, the colors represent schools or school systems that were impacted by some element of climate change. So you can see the light blue are extreme cold, the red are extreme heat, the green are flooding, the gray are hurricanes, the yellow is like other severe weather, and the orange is wildfire. And so that could be, it could be the school closes, it could be sports activities got canceled, it could be it affected something at the school, maybe there was a power outage or something like that. So you can see, there's big white gaps in that map, obviously, but one of the things that we know about when we look at the map of the US is that the places where the colored dots are is where the vast majority of our population in this country lives. So huge numbers of young people have already felt a direct impact of climate change in their school day. And so they are probably gonna have some kind of feeling about that. And we are seeing more and more this research around climate anxiety, climate grief, climate eco-anxiety. There's all different kind of names for it, but this phenomenon of the way we think about the planet and the climate deeply affecting our mental health, the mental health of our young people, and it is having a really big impact on the way that we teach. I mentioned yesterday, I talked a little bit about the most recent, the 6th IPCC assessment report, as the first report that actually pulled out mental health as a major impact of climate change, and talking about the ways that climate change can affect our physical health, it can affect the way that our body metabolizes medications, it can affect the number of domestic disputes that we see, it can affect mental health, it can affect mental health conditions. So lots of different ways that climate affects our mental health, and this is only becoming worse in an environment where many leaders, and particularly in our country, we're seeing this direct pullback of climate action. So things that were once giving people hope, it's been flipped on its head, and now it feels like we're doing less than ever. This part of the presentation is really depressing, I'm sorry. It'll get better, don't worry. Just gotta bring you way down before I bring you up. So if you were there yesterday, you saw some of this research. You'll see a couple more slides come in today as well. There was a study that was published in the Lancet Planetary Health in 2021. This looked at over 10,000 children in 10 different countries and asked them how they're feeling about climate change. How worried are you about climate change? And I want to break down this graph a little bit because it can be kind of confusing. So there's two different questions on there. On this chart, the top set of bars is all 10 countries' data collected, and if you want to look at the US only, it's on the bottom set of bars. The different colors represent how worried people are about climate change in this age range. So the dark red and like the orange ones, those are the very worried or moderately worried about climate change. If we add that yellow bar, which is the moderately worried, or the somewhat worried bar, extremely, very, and then yellow is moderately. We're over 80, we're almost 85% of youth in this study across all 10 countries said that they were quite worried, moderately, very, or extremely worried about climate change. So it is very prevalent. And then if you look at that blue bar that's on top, that bar is the percent of youth who answered, the question was, does your fear, your anxiety about climate change negatively impact your daily life, your daily functioning? And this one was, I thought, extremely heartbreaking because that's, what is that, 45% of young people in this global study said, yeah, it affects my daily life. And if you say, okay, well, other countries obviously some of them had much higher numbers. Even in the US, 26%, that's 1 out of 4 young people that we meet is their daily life is affected by their feelings about climate change. That is a big, big deal. And the way that we teach can have a big impact on that. More sad data. A similar study was done last year, also published in the Lancet Planetary Health, and it looked at a little bit older age range. Just looked at ages 16 to 24, and it looked at young people in the United States specifically. So on this graph, we're seeing the y-axis is US states, and then again, we're asking the question, how worried, if at all, are you about climate change and its impacts on people and the planet? What's important to know over top of the specific number is it again goes from not at all to extremely worried. Not at all and a little are these two really light colors here. These are the people who are not at all or a little worried. Everything from here on is either moderately, extremely, or very worried. So that concern that we saw in those children in the 2021 study, we're seeing this is carrying on as they get older, and in some cases it looks like it's maybe even getting more extreme, the anxiety that young people have. The original study had a really interesting other question I didn't talk about yesterday, which was their feelings of betrayal versus reassurance from government on their responses to climate change. And overall, what we saw is that these young people, they feel very anxious about climate change, and they feel profoundly betrayed by their governments, all levels of government, in terms of their actions that they have taken. And this is not only young people, adults are also anxious, and so we're dealing with a group of young people that we're teaching who are feeling anxiety. We as the teachers are also feeling that, and that's important for us to recognize. So this is the most recent, this is the 2024, spring 2025 survey from the Yale Study for Climate Communication, whatever that thing is called, I always get it wrong, Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. So we see it's right around 65-70% of adults are feeling either somewhat or very worried about climate change. This is an increase of about 10 percentage points from about 10 years ago. That very concerned part has increased pretty significantly as well in the last decade. So we're feeling this too. We've got to manage our own emotions as we're thinking about this. It is not hard to figure out why we're anxious, right? You hear the news, you see the studies, you see the data. It's really important that we're clear on this, that the data is shared, that there's not information. But what I want to talk about today in more depth, to get out of the sad part, is how we really are sometimes getting in our own way when it comes to climate change education. If we want people to take action and make a difference, the way that we're teaching can be causing a problem. There is research that actually shows that climate doom is just as effective at causing inaction as climate denialism. So just think about that. If you're spending so much time focusing on the doom in hopes that it's going to motivate people to action, it's just as bad as saying climate change doesn't exist at all. So doom is demotivating, it's disempowering, it makes you feel like there's nothing that can be done, and we don't want our young people to be feeling that way, and we don't want to feel that way as adults. So what we're talking about today is the importance of hope. And since we're here at a college, I hope you will indulge my slight detour into nitpicky details about types of hope. So sometimes people criticize the idea of hope because they say, well, hope is just oh, I hope everything works out. And that is one type of hope. That's a type of hope that's based on denial, really, and not understanding the facts. That type of hope is not useful. It does not result in action. It does not result in change happening. We don't want that kind of hope. We want hope that is action-focused, that is actually going to make a difference. And there's a couple of different ways we can think about hope. And you might have gone to some of the workshops earlier today that talked about the idea of critical hope. Constructive hope is one way of thinking about hope. This is a solution-focused hope. This is hope that says, yes, we know that there are big problems and they're serious. Like, this is a bad situation. And also, like, we know that we've got this together. Like, there are solutions, we're gonna work on them, we can get there, we can take action. So that's this idea of constructive hope. This idea of critical hope is actually this was a newer term to me as I started researching for this presentation. And I was really interested in the idea of critical hope as another type of hope, also focused on action, but it's focused much more on systems, action within systems. So recognizing that the problems that we have today are systemic problems, that means the solutions are going to be systemic, and it deeply engages with what those systems look like and how they got there and what we can do to change them. So constructive and critical hope, both really important. Both of them are going to play a key role in how I think we should be educating around climate change. And together, collectively, they make up what I'm calling today transformative hope. So this is a sort of newer term. I've only seen it a couple different times. But the idea of transformative hope is based in this, if you are an educator, transformative learning theory. So this is a theory of education, of learning, that is really based on these deep structural shifts in your emotions and your own belief system. And so that's where you're learning. So transformative hope is a type of hope that combines this constructive and this critical perspective to say, we're gonna focus on solutions, and we're gonna focus on solutions that address both specific problems locally and larger systemic problems. So it's this very well-rounded view of hope that we're looking at here. So what we're going to talk about now is how to take that understanding of hope and use it to repair the way that we teach climate change. And again, many of you here, some of you are educators, some of you are not. I would encourage you to remember that we all really educate in some way. If you talk to your family, if you talk to your friends, you are an educator in some way. So this can be applied, but again, remembering, I'm kind of talking to teachers here a little bit too. I will also say, well, this research I'm looking at is K-12 climate education research. Some of this can apply certainly in higher education contexts as well. So there is a researcher, her name is Martha Monroe, really well known in the field of place-based stewardship education. She's out of University of Florida. She's done a couple of really great reviews of the climate change education literature, and she's got her big one that people are aware of was from 2017. She's got one coming out this year that she let me have a sneak peek at, so you're getting a behind the curtain of what she's going to be publishing very soon, which is an updated review of climate change education research, specifically in the K-12. And what she found when she looked at all of the climate change education literature out there is that there are 3 major domains that need to be addressed when you're thinking about good climate change education. One of those domains is the cognitive domain. So this is where we tend to focus when we're teaching about climate change. This is the facts, this is the science, this is the data. This is why climate change gets taught in science classrooms and not really in the other classrooms very often. So the cognitive domain, important. This is where the facts are. I will also say our heavy emphasis on the cognitive domain is partly what leads to that feeling of doom and overwhelm, because these other 2 domains are not paid careful enough attention to. In addition to the cognitive domain, we've got the socio-emotional domain. So this is the how am I feeling about all of these things, all that anxiety we talked about that the students have and that the teachers have. That's that socio-emotional domain. We gotta feel how we're handling it ourselves, and we have to think about how does this affect the bigger system, not only our own feelings, but those around us and in our community as well. The socio-emotional domain can really help us broaden our climate change education out of the science classroom too, if you think about that. The science teachers aren't usually the ones who are doing the SEL lessons. They're just, maybe they should, but they're not usually. So where do we talk about these social emotional learning? Where are we talking about our communities? Maybe they are our civics or geography or our social studies classes. There's room to expand the way that we educate. And then the third domain that needs to be addressed is the action-oriented domain. So we gotta know the facts, we gotta get ourselves good internally, we've gotta understand the systems, and then we have to put that into action. So many young people, they got a lot of facts in their head, but they don't know what to do with them. And so we've got to help our young people understand how to put what they've learned about climate change into action. So these are the three sort of overarching domains, and they are expressed in 6 major characteristics or 6 major practices in climate change education. So I'm going to go into each of these in a little bit more detail, so I'm not going to read them all aloud right now, but I want to point out some of you I know are really, really engaged in high quality, place-based, stewardship-focused, environmental education on different topics that might not be specifically climate related. And if you are, you might look at this list and be like, yeah, I'm familiar with these ideas. These are ideas of how to do really good education with students, especially science, especially environmental. But what I want to talk about is how these apply specifically to climate, especially the last 2. So we'll talk about kind of 2 at a time, because one of the things you'll notice is that these characteristics are very intertwined, and oftentimes one of them leads to another or improves another characteristic. So this is where we're going to kind of start going more into depth on how to do this type of education that uses transformative hope. So the first 2, really high quality climate change education is personally relevant and it is engaging. So I have up here, this is the teacher I worked with for a long time in the city of Grand Rapids. Their students were learning about water quality, and they were doing research in the Grand River on macroinvertebrate populations and how it affected water quality there versus in a stream in their own, behind their own school. So this personal relevance is what makes it engaging for students a lot of time. But it also helps them really wrap their minds around these really huge, giant, like high in the sky climate issues, like global things, even for, well, certainly for elementary and middle school students and high school students, college students, beyond. It can be hard to wrap our mind around a global system. And so we need to bring that home and see, what does that impact look like locally here in our own communities? How can we engage with the data, engage with our community in a way that makes this connect to what is interesting to me? If we are making it locally relevant and personal, these students are going to be more engaged. And part of this engagement and local relevance is not shying away from whatever equity issues arise as a result of that investigation. You will see them. If you're talking about climate change, if you're talking about environmental issues, you're going to uncover the disparities that exist in your community, and we need to be honest about those. The best way to make this relevant and engaging to our students is often to incorporate this action-oriented, hands-on type of learning, like doing research in your own community. For climate, it could be something as simple as like going out and measuring the temperature of different surfaces on the schoolyard. Is it cooler in the shade than it is on the asphalt? And something simple like that, just to really drive that idea home. High quality climate change education also engages in scientific inquiry and builds problem solving skills. Again, this kind of builds on what we already discussed. But I will note, and I said this yesterday too, that when I look at the misinformation, the disinformation, the things that people believe about climate change that are just totally out there and wrong, so frequently those ideas are based in a lack of understanding of the scientific process. So we need to teach the scientific method. I know that we do that, but we need to explain how that applies when it comes to climate change. How the way we're looking at new data as it arises doesn't invalidate everything that we learned before. It doesn't mean that we were lying or changed our minds. It means that we're doing science. This already, but the best way to understand how to use the scientific process is to actually do the scientific process. So have them come up with questions. Identify something interesting in your community and investigate it together as a community. I thought it was so cool, Tanya, when you mentioned that like a school was doing air quality measurements, around the Whitehall area, around White Lake. What a cool example of, investigating your own community issues and using that as a tool for learning. You don't have to know everything as a teacher either to do that. I sometimes get teachers who are like, I don't know how to do this, I'm scared, I don't know all the information. You don't have to know everything. That's where people like me or like Denise or Elena or Janet, other community partners can come in and help support you and your students in that work. So building relationships with local scientists, local partners can really make a big difference and help you also come up with ideas for what type of action or project might be appropriate for your students. And then finally, the final two that I think are really, really important for climate change education especially are this ability to think critically and communicate. Two things here. One of those things is this idea of deliberative dialogue. And some of you, educators in the room might be familiar with this, some of you might not. There are different ways to talk about problems and talk about your opinions about those issues. Discussion, when we talk about discussion, generally that's like, we all say our opinions, everybody gets a voice, everybody gets heard, but it's very much like, this is what I think, this is what I think, this is what I think. That's discussion. There's not necessarily a shared goal, but the goal is to share what we feel. There's also debate, and sometimes debate can be useful in a classroom for students to practice rhetoric and things like that. But debate does inherently set you up to be kind of fighting with each other. It has a winner and a loser. And when it comes to climate change, I would really encourage you to try to avoid setting up winners and losers in this conversation. And that's why this practice of deliberative dialogue, you can't click on that link right now while I'm talking to you, but I did share a PDF version of this presentation if you would like to have it, that links to some resources on how to do deliberative dialogue. This is a discussion tool that really has you starting from a place of shared values, of shared vision, and saying, where is it that we want to get? And in that context, we'll talk about where we are and what we think and what we think good solutions are. But it sets the stage. The ground rule is we're gonna work together towards a solution. Highly effective when it comes to these hot button issues like climate change education, and this process of critical thinking, of critically evaluating the science that you see, the way that it's talked about in the media, in scientific papers, in the community, teaching young people to really think about their sources and not shy away from addressing those misconceptions. You don't have to get in a debate and be mean about it, but there are a lot of things that people think and say about climate change that are just demonstrably false. So don't shy away from that. We can correct that. And again, doing it in this manner that is focused on how do we get to this healthy, livable future that we all want to have. There's a lot of ways to do this. There's a lot of different thought processes on how to do this. It's a lot of information. It can be complicated. There's a couple of models that I think are really helpful. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail because I don't have a ton of time, but one that I think is really helpful is this bicycle model. So if you're trying to think of all the pieces you want to fit in your climate change education, the framework that it's all based on is your identity, your values, and your worldview. These action-oriented pieces, your critical thinking skills, are the thing that, when they're in gear with this pedal here, drive your knowledge forward, drive your action forward. Your motivation, and you've got the handlebars, or your future orientation, your motivation, they're kind of directing you where you're going to go, and then using your feelings, your emotions, your hope to kind of light the way, and always reminding yourself of what barriers might exist, those operational barriers. So example of what this bicycle model might look like in practice, this is some students from Upton Middle School in St. Joseph. They were, a couple years ago, were the winners of a prize that we give out each year called the Environmental Service Award. They're part of this green team, this green club. They visualize themselves, their identity, their values as we are students who care about the environment. They had this base kind of knowledge of compost, of soil, of the importance of that, the impact it has on climate change. They had guidance from their teachers and adults who supported them in overcoming some of these operational barriers like cost to implementing a program at their school. They were really positive. They were we can do this. We had these feelings of emotion of we can get this something happening at our school, and they used their critical thinking skills to say, well, okay, if compost, if food waste is a big deal for climate change, let's do something about it. Let's put it into action. We know we can't do a big giant program that costs a lot of money at our school, but maybe we can find a partner to support us to drive our work forward. And they were able to find some community partners that brought them in, that helped them with covering the costs and the logistics around pickup of their food waste, and they were starting to be able to compost food waste from their cafeteria. So just thinking about, if you're designing a lesson or an activity, just having, you don't have to do everything perfectly, but having that frame of reference in mind of like, did I cover all the things? Did I cover all the pieces in my lesson here? Is one way to help you remember those things without having to like memorize a list. I like a picture, a list. And then finally, my last little bit here, I want to talk a little bit about regenerating and where this comes from. So those are kind of the details. I could probably talk for a couple more hours on how to do all those details, but I want to really spend a little bit of time, because I think it's important, focusing in on where this comes from. And this is the piece where I was like, oh man, me and Tanya should go on the road talking about stuff together, because I thought that talking about your community and your 22 years working in White Lake highlights what I have found to be true over so many years, which is that the work that we do comes from a place of love. And ultimately, even if you're trying to motivate people based on fear, on doom, on anger, you gotta think deeper. What is it that causes that fear? What is it that causes that anger or that sense of doom? What causes that? That's rooted in love for a place, for a person, for a community. That comes from love, and that's where our desire to fight for our community, to address climate injustice, to care for people who are either in our orbit or we just care for people in general. That love is what drives our work, and it's very important to keep that in mind when we are educating, because sometimes we just like pile on a bunch of facts and there's no why. So cultivating that love, cultivating that care and that connection to nature is a really important part of high quality, effective climate change education. So this quote up here from David Sobol, really well-known writer in the place-based education world. Where does that love come from? That love comes from connection. It comes from firsthand experience. It comes from building a relationship with a place, with a community. One of the things that I just found really touching about Tanya's story too is just that sense of community, building that community, having those relationships, being in it with other people, having, living in the house you grew up in, the community that you grew up in. You can, of course, build new relationships in new places, but really teaching our young people how to love a place. One time I was at a presentation and the speaker, this was at a Mayo conference years ago, maybe Bridget will remember this. This is when Brad Kick from the Farm Place spoke, and the overarching message of this presentation was that as environmental educators, our job is to commit to reducing abstractions. And that has really stuck with me, because we teach about the planet, we teach about climate change, but those are abstractions. What is not an abstraction is White Lake. What is not an abstraction is that flower that my daughter is like freaking out about. She's so excited about in front of her face. Our job is to make the abstract concrete for our audience, that we can love something that's real and concrete. And so David Sobol, that's what he's getting at with this quote here, is we need to ask them, we need to let them understand and build that connection before we ask them to save it. And I don't have a ton of time for this, but this is one of my favorite ideas to talk about, is sort of how do we cultivate that? There's been some interesting literature reviews on what this looks like, and really thinking about the developmental stages of our young people when we are cultivating that relationship and those values. When they are really young, little kids, animals, plants, the cool, the charismatic things are what they tend to connect with. Doesn't mean you can't talk about other environmental topics, but they tend to start that entry point. It's creatures. My daughter came home yesterday. She had a frog that her friend handed her on the way to the bus stop and said, "Can you please take this home?" And she was like, "Okay." And so she brought it home, and then we had to have it in a container on the counter all night, and then she brought it in a Tupperware back to school today to get back to her friend. The animal connection is real. I did not have to nurture that. Early to mid elementary, those ages 8 to 11, and there's, this is not hard and fast, this is sort of generally, that idea of exploration. As your body grows, as your mind grows, you have physically more control over your body, you kind of naturally want to explore. So giving them the opportunity to be out in nature, explore freely, is a key part of that development of their values. And then it's really not until we get into adolescence that their young people's brains develop to the point where they can really start to comprehend these ideas of being part of a larger system, of my actions as an individual affecting the whole. Does that mean that we shouldn't talk about responsibility to others and care when they're younger? No. It just means that it's going to click, it's going to start to click at that age. Just like we talk about, your prefrontal cortex isn't developed until you're 24. Our brains are always, they're growing. And so trying to push too much of this social action on kids who are developmentally not there yet can sometimes be problematic. So just be thinking about, have we kind of gone through these other stages as we're teaching our young people? Just coming back to this slide to mention again that transformative hope, we talked about the constructive and the critical sides of it, is based in those values and in that care and in that relationship that has been built. That is where it comes from, and that's where we need to be trying to educate out of. What does this look like? I have less negative time, so I'm gonna go quick. Some practical tactics for teaching with practical hope, with transformative hope. And you'll see, these look similar to those 6 characteristics. It's because they're connected. It's based on that. But what does it look like practically? We need to make sure students are empowered with practical skills and knowledge to take those actions. So we need to not just tell them about things that they could do, but actually give them a chance to practice that. And sometimes they're going to come up with ideas that are really dumb and they're not going to work, but you know what? We got to let them try. Let young people try. And sometimes you're going to think an idea is really dumb and it's not going to work, and then it does. And then you feel like you might have been the dumb one. So give them a chance to practice, to flex those muscles, to build that skill, especially in the classroom where stakes are low as opposed to the real world where they're a little bit higher. We need to encourage critical thinking, not just about sources and information, but also about the systems and the everything that underlies climate change, not just greenhouse gases, but why do we live in the world? Where did this come from? What caused this? We need to foster resilience and emotional coping strategies. I have a couple of these I'll pull up on the screen in a couple of minutes. We don't have time to go into detail on them, but I will talk about them a little bit. And then we really want to be focusing on systemic change that addresses underlying injustices and really pays attention to equity in the solution forming. So these are kind of the big characteristics of teaching with transformative hope. Skills and knowledge, this is the cognitive realm. This is the things that we're familiar with. We gotta talk about how climate works. We've gotta embed an action project. There's another cool model that I really like. It's called the Hope Wheel. So spend some time looking into that if you're interested in that more. Another way to think about how to make sure that we're balancing and teaching about hope correctly. So this Hope Wheel has these, the spokes of the wheel. They call them the handrails. So we've got honesty, awareness, space holding, and action. Each of those spokes is balanced. So honesty, we've got to be honest about solutions, but also the situation that we're in. Awareness, we got to be aware of ourselves, but also the broader world. Space holding, we got to think about holding space for our own emotion. It's got to be a safe space, hold space for that, but it's also got to be brave. We got to risk a little bit in our communication. And then actions, individual and collective. So those are those things to grab onto when you're teaching about climate change. The kind of rim of this wheel, they call them the guardrails, things to watch out for while you're doing that. Anxiety, misinformation, and false hope, or that hope that's kind of based on just I hope it all works out. And then to layer over this as you get better and better at teaching, these lenses of complexity, of justice, of different perspectives, of creativity, different types of solutions, and empathy for others. So this is a really cool model, has some really cool examples. I won't go into detail on this, but this slide kind of shows you it's a shot out of the study on the Hope Wheel that really shows how you can build your education practice. This is a lot to jump right into, so you might do a little bit at a time and get better and better. And as you get better at it, you can layer on more of these lenses, use more of these handrails to improve your education. So here's some example of some questions that you might ask as you're doing this. So if you're trying to work on honesty, you might be asking, is the information I'm presenting, is it honest and truthful? And you're gonna be looking for reliable sources. For complexity, the big thing with complexity is this framing. Are we talking about, are we saying there's a silver bullet? Because there's no silver bullet to climate change. Are we acknowledging that there's lots of different ways to go about that? So there's different ways you can layer on these different frames and these different handrails. So this is kind of some examples, again, just to show you the type of support that is out there in that research as you're developing your climate change education materials. One pitfall I just briefly want to mention is the concept of outsourcing hope. So I've got Greta up here. Greta is like the symbol, right, of hope for many people when it comes to climate change. And I just love this quote from her in 2021, hope is not passive, hope is not blah, blah, blah. Hope is telling the truth and taking action. So critical in climate change education. She nails it right on the head, as she usually does, in a very succinct way. But one thing that I see a lot of as an adult is adults saying to kids, oh man, you inspire me. You give me so much hope. And that's not bad. It's so good to be inspired by our kids. But I've heard so many young people say to me, I wish that it wasn't all on us. I wish that we didn't have to do it all. I wish that adults would be there with us and that we would work on it together. So hope is really critical, putting hope in our young people, acknowledging how amazing they are and what they're doing. I tell people all the time, young people are not the leaders of the future. They are the leaders now. They are the leaders today. But we need to be really careful not to outsource our own hope, not to say, oh, we don't have to worry about it because the young people have got it. That is really important that we watch ourselves with that. This is something we should be doing together. They want our support. They also want to, be given the opportunity to lead, but knowing that we've got their backs. So just watch out for that idea of outsourcing hope. Bridget's gonna follow up with some really concrete, clear tools that are gonna help us think about how to operationalize and really put into practice our climate change education ideas that we've been talking about today. There are lots of ways that can help us build that resilience. This is another spot where earlier today I was like, oh man, yeah, I could just have Tanya do this part. We talked about it, sharing our feelings. One of the really cool things that came to mind during the White Lake talk was this idea of reframing. That's one of the emotional coping tools we can use with young people. So there is a lesson in our environmental ed curriculum that is about White Lake, uses White Lake as a case study. And in that lesson, the framing for the students is transforming an area of concern into an area of care. And I think that's a really cool framing to say, we're concerned, it flips the script, right, on that doom and that fear and highlights instead what's underneath that is the care and the love for the place. So reframing can be really powerful. Building those connections, I love the idea of we celebrate when we're done. When we make progress, we celebrate. We do it with our friends in our community who got there with us. We take care of ourselves along the way. We nurture our connection to place, which is what is driving our work in the first place. So there are some really incredible resources on the Michigan Climate Hub that Bridget will talk about. If you are new to dealing with resilience and climate emotions in the classroom especially, but also in your community, the Climate Mental Health Network has some very, very, very wonderful toolkits for how to handle your own emotions. One thing I love about them, they have an actual meditation and support resource for teachers so that you can kind of ground yourself before you get into this, as well as resources for caregivers if you're just worried about doing this with your kids or your family members, as well as educators in there. So really good resources to help foster our emotional resilience. And then to kind of close us off, I just want to quickly give you an example of what this might look like to educate in a framework of systemic change, because I've given you a lot of research and facts and information and principles, but sometimes it's hard to ground that and bring that back down to the real world. Again, I'm going to try to reduce the abstraction a little bit for you and give you an example of what this might look like, briefly. So say you're a teacher and you want to teach a lesson about trees. I use the example of trees because there's some really awesome resources about using trees to teach about climate change on the Climate Hub that Bridget will tell us about. So you're going to start by thinking about all three domains? Do I have the cognitive domain developed in there? Do I have the action domain? Am I attending to emotions and systems? So a teacher who's teaching about trees in the context of climate change, they might begin by having their students go outside and do some observations, make some connections, think about trees in their life, build that personal connection. They might teach about the benefits of trees, what they do to soak up stormwater and carbon, really hone in on that science, that system, the role that trees play in the system. Then they might say, hey, let's look at where trees are in our community. And they pull up something like the Tree Equity app. And they discover how many trees are near us, how many trees are near other places in our community. They might look at the demographics and the history of those places to understand, start to answer questions about why there's more trees in one place than another. That might lead them to say, well, we really need to plant more trees. And so we're gonna learn how to plant a tree. We're gonna bring in an expert who knows about trees, and they're gonna teach us about tree planting. We're gonna use this cool tool called iTree to develop a planting plan, and we're gonna find some money, and we're gonna do a planting project in our community. So you can see we've sort of thought about all those domains, and we've incorporated, if you think about, did we empower students with practical skills and knowledge? Yeah, we taught them about how trees work. We brought in people who can teach them about how to plant a tree and do the skill. Did we encourage critical thinking? Yeah, we had them thinking about where the trees are and why they're there and what systems underlie the differences in their communities. Did we foster resilience and emotional coping? I didn't talk a ton about that, but we had their tree, that they go out to in their neighborhood, that they look at, that they connect with. Did we promote systemic change? Yes, because we're thinking about the systems and the underlying resources there, and they're going to plant a tree somewhere that makes a big difference. So it sounds overwhelming, but it's not as hard as it looks. And if you need support in this kind of work, lots of people in the room are here whose literal job it is to do that. It's literally my job to help you do that. It's literally Bridget's job. Denise, I'm making it your job. It's Denise's job. It's Janet's job. It's Elena's job. It's our job to help you with that. So please don't be afraid to reach out. So just to close, sorry, a little long. We've covered a lot today. We covered the need for transformative hope, the anxiety that's behind it. We've talked about what excellent climate change education that's rooted in hope looks like. And we've thought a little bit about action that addresses systems and how that action is rooted in love. And so I'm going to close with a thing that I like to do in presentations. I have a whole other presentation I do about emotional resilience and climate change that's rooted in poetry, and I make people listen to a lot of poetry and also write some, but I'm not going to make you do the writing part today, but I am going to make you listen to a little poetry. And I'm going to read aloud to you a poem that I was real tempted for a second to just send instead of my presentation, but I didn't, obviously. So this is a poem that was featured on, I can't stand there. It was featured on Being, the podcast with Krista Tippett a couple years ago. It was written by a young Palestinian climate activist named Aisha Sadiqa. And in the podcast, it was read by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who is the editor of the All We Can Save climate book. I was going to play it for you, but I decided, since we couldn't figure out how to do the sound, that I'm going to read it aloud to you instead. And the poem, for me, it just really sums up kind of what I'm trying to say to you a little bit, which is about how our work is rooted in love and how it's really hard, but we have people who are here to do it with us. And if we forget about the love part, we're going to really struggle to make any progress. So the poem is called On Another Panel About Climate, They Asked Me to Sell the Future, and All I've Got is a Love Poem. So written by Aisha Sadiqa. What if the future is soft and revolution is so kind that there is no end to us in sight? Whole cities breathe, and bad luck is bested by a promise to the leaves. To withstand your own end is difficult. The future frolics about, promised to no one, as is her right. Rage against injustice makes the voice grow harsher yet. If the future leaves without us, the silence that will follow will be an unspeakable nothing. What if we convince her to stay? How rare and beautiful it is that we exist, What if we stun existence one more time? When I wake up, get out of bed, my 7-year-old cousin with her ruptured belly tags along, then follows my grandmother, aunts, my other cousins, and the violent shape of their drinking water. The earth remembers everything. Our bodies are the color of the earth, and we are nobodies. Been born from so many apocalypses, what's one more? Love is still the only revenge. It grows each time the earth is set on fire. But for what it's worth, I'd do this again. Gamble on humanity 100 times over. Commit to life unto life as the trees fall and take us with them. I'd follow love into extinction. I hope that you have something, someplace, someone that you love enough that you can ground that feeling into, that will encourage you to act and to teach and to speak out of a sense of hope, a transformational kind of hope, not a denial-based hope. And if you need support in that, please reach out anytime. I'm happy to help you with that. And I am so grateful that I was able to come and share not only all the science and stuff, but also that you indulged me and let me read a little poetry to you at the end. So thank you very much.